Why is it that the government today seems to spend more and more money and get bigger and bigger every year? And despite that, they do not shrink back down. They just continue to be monstrous. And when we have a new crisis, they just keep expanding. And the debt to GDP ratios for most big countries around the world just keep growing. So this is not where we want to be. And it's starting to be a real problem with $1 trillion debts for a lot of countries. And for example, the United States approaching over $40 trillion debt now at the moment. And we see the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve just keep expanding, etc. What I want to do today is analyze this situation through through a theoretical lens provided by the legendary philosopher Thomas Hobbes from the 1600s. And by doing this, I hope to provide every one of us with a toolbox that makes it easier to approach the current situation and therefore reduce the frustration that we see, because everything that's happening right now is predictable. And through having the toolbox ready, we can approach the world and our investments in a more certain way. And that is what I want to do today. So, Thomas Hobbes' most famous work is called Leviathan. And this is an extract from chapter 13, one part of the book that I think is the most important part and that really gets us to the very core of what we want to analyze today. So I'm going to read straight from it here. During the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, they are in that condition which is called war, and such a war as is of every man against every man. In such conditions, there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain. And consequently, no culture of the earth, no navigation, no use of goods that may be imported by sea, no buildings, no instruments of moving things, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society. And which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and all the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. This part of his work might be something that really encapsulate what he Thomas Hobbes is talking about. He see people as something very selfish. The nature of a man is focusing on themselves basically, and therefore, if we don't have something that stabilize humans, like an overarching power or state that stabilize our behavior, I think we'll go mayhem and we will have anarchy, and we will act solitary poor. We will become nasty. We will just have kind of war all the time, and that is the worst part, because people will die, get hurt, will not get food, no stability at all in the world. And this was the worst place, according to Thomas Hobbes. So to avoid having a lot of wars, basically, Thomas Hobbes' idea was that we need a state, a very strong state with military power that could provide that stability. And he was, in terms of theory, willing to go very far to being able to provide that stability. And he said basically that even if it's like a dictatorship, if the people agree to that dictatorship and that provides us with stability and no wars, that is okay. That is also why Thomas Hobbes has got a lot of stick for his ideas through a more modern lens. But I think when we see what's going on, every time we hit the crisis and see it through this lens, we can see that the government just reach for more power. You could see during the pandemic, for example, the COVID-19, with everything that was decided by the government at that moment. We can see it now with the expansion of the government to provide more security for people, to keep them in place, just to control more. It's all about the control. And seeing the ideas already from the 1600s about the human nature, and knowingly after Thomas Hobbes how much of the political thinkers have him in mind going forward, we need to understand that the thoughts presented here are very well used today also. And we need to think about this when we analyze how politicians behave around the world. And now I'm back with some graphs that are gonna show you the notion of government just expanding over time. They're not looking back. So this first graph here is the money supply in the US since the 1960s. And what I mean by this graph is obviously to solve problems, often money supply is inflated, more money is printed, and more money going around because through doing that, the government and the central banks can solve problems that is hard to solve just by printing money, and people will not understand that they are getting taxed, but they're getting taxed through inflation instead of the normal tax, and that's harder for humans to comprehend, and therefore it's easier for politicians to use this measure to keep everyone calm and reach that very important state of calmness that Thomas Hobbes also want, the governmental control that keeps people in their place and makes sure that we don't have any wars, any anarchy around. So this is a simple way to very slowly tax away people's wealth and put that into a very strong, stable government that supposedly will provide the goods that people needs to keep them calm and just follow order. So that's the first graph I want to show you. Now over to the second one. The second graph I'm about to show you is military spending in billions of dollars in the US from 1960 to 2024. And as you see here, we start at $47 billion. And through the time, this graph just keeps adding and adding. And at the moment, we're at $1 trillion. And this is just accelerating in a speed we haven't seen in a while. So even though the percentage spending of GDP actually has gone down, the pure numbers here are quite obvious. We looking at this through the lens of Thomas Hobbes. Obviously, the military is a very important factor of the state to make sure that we don't end up in war. To have that power, that sense of security is very important, and also make sure that we don't have anarchy in the country that we live in. We accept that the state will keeps everyone secure, and that have to cost a lot of money. So obviously, spending money at military is okay through this lens. And if the leading people, politicians, feels like Thomas Hobbes did, then obviously just keep adding to this debt through military spending is the correct way to do, if that makes sure that people don't end up losing their life in useless wars, basically. So make sure there are no wars through having a lot of power, a lot of spending, can be seen as useful through this lens. Hence why probably a lot of politicians, even today, are saying, oh, we have to keep increasing the spending on military because that's how we end up not in war. Is this what actually happens? You can do your own analysis on that, but that is how politicians think and why we are in the position we are. And you have the evidence here, what happens over time. And why is this a problem as an investor? Obviously, if the government gets too burdened and they need to just keep printing money to finance this model of thought, this philosophy of life through a political lens, obviously, sometime the money supply will lead to the countries being unstable because the debt gets too high, and that can make an impact on, for example, the stock market, your investments over time. And you need to make sure what countries do you invest in, what countries do you feel most secure. When you invest in a company, for example, you need to feel very secure in your own heart and soul that you can keep believing in that marketplace, in that company over a long time, just not 1 or 2 years. You need to be certain through 10 or 20 or 30 years, and that is why this type of information is very important. One of my core theses today through the lens of Thomas Hobbes is, when crisis hit us, we expand the government, the control, the welfare, the military, and through that we do that to remove the supposedly threat of anarchy, of a disappointment of people rising up against power, because that's is the worst thing that can happen, obviously, according to Thomas Hobbes. To prove this, I show you this picture. This is the US government's expenditure as a percentage of GDP since the 1800s. And think about this, the percentage is rising through the time, but also the total GDP is a lot higher. This means that the percentage is a part of a much bigger pie. So the United States has been very successful, obviously, with a huge GDP and growth domestic product. And as we see here, the 1800s, they have 2.35% of GDP was US government expenditure, up to 5%. Obviously, it's a long time ago, 1800s. So do what you want with that information. I still think it proves a point here. And yeah, here 1865, 13.79%, 24%, 1990. We have the war machine, in the industrial machine going on. 1945, after World War II, the United States obviously became that industrial powerhouse of the world, very important for the world, and the GDP of the United States of America just exploded, but also like their government spending. And 2009, we were up to 41.4%, and 2020, the pandemic struck and it was 44.57%. So over time, we see here a lot of crisis is hitting a country. I have US as an example, but this example here is applicable. You can use it on any modern country, almost any country in Western society. The government tend to grow over time, both as a part of a percentage of GDP, but also in pure spending, obviously. And this is to keep people satisfied, happy, etc., to being able to meet the expectations of the welfare state. So what I focused on today is what we can call an economic Leviathan, and that is the choices that the government are doing in terms of economic that are impacting our freedom of choice and that are not very clear for everyday people. Hence, why the inflation are so high and people are feeling that they can't afford buying a house, they can't afford groceries like they used to do, despite working harder and harder and harder. There are something that doesn't fit in how people feel, while people who we listen to are talking about, oh, the GDP are growing, etc. So this is about narrative, and the connection to Hobbes here is that even though the modern, like they did back in the day, they were protecting the life of people, now they are protecting the economy, because if the economy collapses, obviously, or all power uh, for the state are collapsing. So they need to protect the economy through every means necessary, and doing that, they even are taking money from people through inflation without people understanding, which is very immoral. But it's it's the very way they need to do to control the narrative over time. So it's still very logical through a lens of through the lens of Thomas Hobbes. I would also say that we do see some implications on the personal freedoms of people that feel like are increasing lately, both in the United States of America, but also in Europe and different countries, especially through the artificial intelligence and new laws that are there to supposedly protect us. For example, a lot of government security operations, they have, with that I mean CIA, FBI, or similar institutions in other countries, they are getting more tools that can surveil people, and they use these tools to find and make sure people are safe, but they can also use them to keep people from the truth. We have seen this, especially in the United States, through the Epstein files. They are keeping the truth from people instead of showing people the truth, because that is the most important thing, once again, to make sure that we don't have a revolution, to make sure that we stay calm under this government. And according to Thomas Hobbes, that is the most important thing, because when you are living in a country, you accept the rules in that country, even though if that is a dictatorship, even if that is something immoral. The most important thing is to avoid war, to be secure, and even though the rest is important, that comes in second hand. So through that lens, a politician can say, oh, maybe I need to be re-elected once again, because if I don't, that might be the end of this secure state, and that's why we will in the future have dictatorship in this country. So that is the scary part now. We see more and more politicians follow what can I say, the philosophy of Thomas Hobbes in their own perspective, and going into war to protect their own narrative, saying this is for the security of the people of my country. The word Leviathan basically means an ancient beast, and what Hobbes wanted to say with that was that's the nature of everyday human, and to be safe we need protection, and we need to accept that a part of our freedom will not be there, so we can be protected by the strong government. And I would say, regarding today, our Leviathans as of today might not be that we will be shot on the street every day, but they're more about like the global economy, the digital economy, and finance around the world. And what I want you to think about after watching this video here today is, how much of your personal freedom are you willing to give up to have that safety? Do you trust the government enough to let them keep spending the money they have just to keep you safe? Where do we draw a line? Where is enough? That's what I want to bring you into the future. And also, is this impacting the way you think about investing, short term, long term? Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful day.